Welcome to Breaking Indecision. Sometimes, our decision to plan the next best move doesn't always go as planned. What do we do in a world of chaos and overload of information? Do we do the right thing and still end up in the wrong place? From around the world, the Trilateral Strategic Steering Group is broadcasting a deeper dive into those questions that bring the how to the foresight on strategic decision making. Welcome back. Do we have an exciting episode for you today? I am Master Sergeant Philip Berry from Headquarters Air Force A4 Logistics and Maintenance Director, Tesseract, and I will be your host on today's episode of Breaking Indecision. Our esteemed discussion hosts.
I am Matthew Brown. I'm a U.S. Air Force exchange officer in London, working with the RAF. I'm a career special operations aviator. Flew for AFSOC about 16 years prior to branching out into multiple staff assignments.
I'm Colonel Christophe Pubeni. I am the French exchange officer working here at the Pentagon for almost 2 years and a half. My background, I'm an air mobility pilot. Started my career in 1998, C-160. And after I switched to OT&E, flying the Atlas.
We'll be interviewing a man that has lived through some of the toughest decisions.
Hi there, I'm Eric Schmidt. I'm really a computer scientist who's been masquerading as an executive for a few decades, and I've had the privilege of working with the U.S. and Western militaries for the last 7 years in various advisory roles.
We got some wonderful questions. We've really been looking forward to having the opportunity to sit down and talk with you and working with your team to get to today. We're doing a pretty interesting adventure looking at decision-making in the post-information age, and we have a few questions that I think will cater to some of your interest in how you've reached out to help the government. If you don't mind, I'd love to start off with a fairly straightforward question, which is, what do you think about the accelerating rate of technology change right now, and does that mean anything to the national security environment and how we make decisions with that?
Well, it feels like technology rate of change has been increasing for my whole life. When you think back to when you were young and the rate at which stuff happened, it's happening so much faster now. And there are many, many theories as to why, but a simple model is it's been true for 1,000 years. If you think about the passage of time and the rate at which consumer products have come along, whether it's radio or television or adoption, all of these things are occurring more quickly as the globe gets more integrated. And then, of course, the internet, broadly speaking, accelerated that in many, many ways. And so you can end up with a relatively small company with a huge global footprint. And I think that ability to scale very quickly is part of what you're seeing now. So you're seeing innovation and growth either occurs very quickly or you're dead because the adoption is so essentially cost-free. It used to take, 20 years to build a business. Now it takes 2 years, 5 years, that kind of stuff at global scale. This has a lot of implications for military and national defense because historically countries and democracies move very, very slowly. And one of the problems is that you've got a divergence between the speed and regulatory issues, strategic threats of these new technologies, and the rate at which these democracies can actually process the change.
Great. Thank you for that, sir. Yesterday, we had the French chief who has been interviewed about the multitude of sensors of the tsunami of data may change the way of doing war. He was really concerned about the fact that we may need to be more cautious because some information may be flawed, that our moral force may be a little bit more tested with that. Do you think the people can have as information as a sensor will change the way we will conduct war in the future?
I do, but I think the most important thing to say is, let's assume we have a real war ahead of us. Hopefully we don't. What's the first thing that happens? The other side tries to control your information space and you try to control their information space. So literally the first question is not a military question, but rather a control over information space question. In particular, can you deny the opponents? Can you get the government thrown out? Can you cause fear in the population about an impending collapse? What can you do before military action that has a military objective that works? Another obvious thing that you would do before a real war is you would try to screw with or destroy or deny access to both satellite communications and traditional communications. Now, for all of these reasons, people are working very hard on hardening communication systems. But at the core, if you look at 2016 and the Russian interference in the US election, as an example, you can see that it's not that hard for an opponent to interfere with the conversation of the other side without a lot of penalty. That's the first observation. I think the second observation is that we need to recognize as militaries and national security people that it's really important to understand that you can't hide anymore. If you have an aircraft carrier, everyone knows where it is all the time. There's too many eyes in the skies. If you have a fixed launching point for some weapon, everyone knows where it is. So all war, in my view, in the future will be won largely by things that are hidden and move quickly. In, out, in, out, in, out. Hide, show, use, hide. And the combination of the fact that there's no privacy anymore, you can't hide anything, and the existence of very small and undetectable drones is probably the biggest change in modern war. Most of the militaries that I've spoken with are not ready for this. They talk about it, but their tactics and procedures are unchanged. They're still doing what they did in the 1970s, and that's got to change.
So it's interesting you mentioned that. So looking at your first answer to the first question and what you just said and how you feel that technology is rapidly changing, we're looking at decision-making in the post-information age, and you're saying that information is ubiquitous. Do you think that we're in a new age, or is this just a manifestation of the same age? Do you maybe have some thoughts on what a post-information age should be characterized by? And does that affect, is warfare maybe something different now?
Well, first place, I don't agree that we're in a post-information age. I think we're in a too much information age, which is certainly not post. And the most important thing to make sure everybody in the audience understands is that we're moving into a new phase of AI. It's a phase generally known as generative AI. And if you look at all the press around ChatGPT, and I've written an article with Dr. Kissinger about this, as well as a book, these systems are going to really change us. Dr. Kissinger argues that this is as big a change, it's an epochal change like the Reformation. And the reason is we've never had an intelligence that was trying to manipulate us that wasn't human. We've never had a partner that wasn't human at our level or better intelligence. As humans, this has never occurred. And yet these systems, for which we cannot fully explain why they work, may actually begin to exceed human capabilities in certain areas. This arrival is a very big deal in a historical context. So if I look at what's going on in the military side, I just don't think the militaries are ready for this. It starts with misinformation, right, which we all understand. I can generate crazy videos and spread them to my opponent and convince them that I'm good and that they're bad and so forth and so on as much as I want. I'll give you another example. It's possible using the same technologies to generate millions of bad viruses, one of which could take everybody out. So these technologies are capable of superhuman power, and we're not ready for their consequences.
So, sir, to jump on that, you just mentioned we are not ready on the consequences. So what will be your advice for the Western force where they need to invest? Is it more on the technological side? So we need to have more technology to be able to spot those misinformation, or we need to have people who are trained about what AI is and what AI is not in decision making?
Well, the most important thing to do is that we win the AI battle. Now, China a few years ago issued a proclamation that they would be the global dominant player by 2030, which last time I checked was about 7 years from now. So that's not very much time. And so the first thing is that all of the Western governments need to do is increase R&D funding, literally invention of these new technologies. It's going to happen quickly, and we want the West to dominate. Western values, principles of freedom, so forth. Imagine if your system of AI was designed by the Chinese system, which includes surveillance and lack of personal freedom. I don't think you'd like that at all. So that's literally the first problem is more R&D in all of the countries. And I can tell you that the United States is ahead. Europe is way behind, and unnecessarily so. The UK has a very strong group and a couple of universities, but again, your government needs to reprioritize AI even higher in terms of innovation. And that's partly for national security, but it's also partly for business, right? Because new businesses are getting created. I think the second thing is that the governments do not have AI competency. My guess is that when you look around the room, you won't have technically trained AI experts in your room, not because you're not very smart, it's just that it's so new. So you need a dedicated pattern to try to get these people out of universities and academia, wherever, into the government, into the military to help. And I think the third, and this is really important, is we need to do more of the kinds of meetings that you're doing. We have to do this together as the West. It's too important. Going to take more than the United States, more than the UK, more than France, more than the EU. And there's so many good ideas out there. But I will tell you, this is happening. I've done this area for about 50 years. This is what I've been doing my whole life. And the key thing to understand right now is this is happening faster than anything else I've seen. And I've been part of 4 or 5 major hype cycles. The compression of time, which is, I guess, expected, it's a slope like this. We've got to get ahead of it, and you have to act now. You can't wait a week.
So this might come a little left field, but we found in our interviews so far that there's a lot of disconnected silos. Looking across sectors and societies, which is something you have a unique advantage because you're not wearing uniform. Where do you see, other than Ukraine, unique and interesting solutions to make better decisions?
Well, I would agree, by the way, that the biggest problem that we face right now is this question of talent and the silos. You don't have enough talent, and everyone's in their own silos. And if they were making aircraft carriers, they're still making aircraft carriers. If they were making artillery, they're still making artillery. If they're planning a ground war, they're still planning a ground war. They haven't integrated. And I think this is a really hard problem for the militaries. I've been in a series of conversations about how to get both decentralized decision-making, but common planning and common integration of information. So the best corporations that I've seen figure out a way to have local actors with common data. So in other words, we all have the same data, and then you over there, you do your thing, you over there do your thing, you do, and we all have an agreed upon goal, which obviously in our case is the defense of the nation or a set of nations. So corporations have figured out a way to do sort of common information and decentralization of action. Most governments are completely hierarchical. So in other words, you basically can't do anything without permission of the boss. And that makes it very difficult for these kinds of quick decision-making loops to work. To me, the challenge is, how do you run a large institution with common information but decentralized action? That's the way I would state it. And that's a worthy decision. Everyone should discuss what is the level of autonomy that you want people to have? What is the level of training you want to have? Do you trust your young people, if you will, to make local decisions? Or is this a decision for the president or the minister of defense or what have you?
I really admire what you have done and what you are still doing today to improve our way of life and how AI can change things in decision making. When we spoke to the former U.S. Secretary of Defense, Secretary Mattis, we spoke about the right balance between science and art of doing decision. And there are many people now, they are really focusing on the science and not the art part of making a decision. Our former general going from George Washington to Montgomery or to Napoleon, they were able to aggregate some data that any algorithm won't be able to aggregate because there are some data you are not thinking about. So if I may, sir, how do you feel that there is still a kind of art in decision making, which means that even though we have the best algorithm in the world, as we won't never ever have the best data because we are not able to share because there are some political constraints, how will the art be something in the future still reliant when we are making decisions?
You know, Secretary Mattis is one of my heroes because of his ability to balance these 2 points. Secretary Mattis was a fantastic general and Secretary of Defense, and we miss him in that role. When I think about the answer to your question, I smile. And the reason I smile is people are always complaining that humans won't be needed in the future. But in fact, your question is exactly why we need humans. Because these systems are going to get very, very good at understanding all the data and giving you choices. But there's simply not enough training data. There's simply not enough experience to have the kind of judgment that is accumulated by years of knowledge in a critical situation. We just don't know how to do it. The problem with the critical situations is the outcomes are too ambiguous. I remember speaking to President Clinton one day, and I said, "What's it like being president?" And he said that the hardest thing about being president is that you'll sit there and make decisions of enormous consequence without knowing what's going to happen. You honestly don't know. And there's no computer, in my opinion, that's going to be able to do a better job of a human or a group of humans in such ambiguous positions. The computers will be very, very good at facts and sensors and who's where and calculating probabilities. But when you honestly don't know, right? Think about Ukraine, Russia. The consensus at the time was that Ukraine would fold in 2 weeks. Thank God they didn't, with great courage. That's an example where the computer would have predicted the consensus, not what happened in the truth. Thank God for humans and leadership. Thank you all for doing this. What you're doing is really important, and I want to help in any way I can. Thank you.